Hello, I am Veronica Johnson, and this is my presentation for my ID model Theory of Psychosocial Development by Erikson. And I am going to take you through my presentation today. So, a little bit about the history of the psychosocial development. The concentration is studying emotional disturbances of persons in their late teens and early 20s. Erikson wrote a book on Martin Luther, and it really became the focal of his work and the testing ground for a lot of his contributions to psychoanalysts, namely his concept of identity. And he also came out with his theory of 8 stages of lifelong psychosocial development in 1950. The first article that I read was review of the clinical Erikson. It brought out that he was not really theory bound. Instead, he enjoyed customizing and personalizing each patient's therapeutic needs, and he tried to have a fresh perspective and not follow just one particular theory. He demonstrated a unique capacity to completely immerse themselves into the patient's world and try to understand the things that they were living through and different struggles that they had. My second article was Ideas and Identities, the Life and Work of Erik Erikson. It helped to bring out that he taught the psychoanalysts and social science work hand in hand, and even though he trained relatively few people, he felt that his strongest influence would come from his writings and the notes that he left from observations. Within his theory, he infused psychoanalysis with Christian ethical principles. Some people agreed with this, and a lot of people did not agree with him infusing the psychoanalyst with Christian principles. The life cycle stages were designed to advance an ethical program and also explain how human development happens all throughout life. The next article I read was Untapped Richness in Erikson's Rootstock. It helped to explain that the theory really expanded the importance of social dynamics, a person um, operating ethically within his social world. He felt that human beings live and developed over a lifetime, not just from childhood to adulthood, but also through older adulthood, and also that social aspect that played a part in their development. Some of the academic positions he held was at Harvard, Yale, and the University of California, Berkeley. He believed that the family structure and society was crucial to the importance of each person's development. And in each of the 8 stages, one psychosocial theme is the focus. There are also two opposing tendencies. One is positive and one being negative. And in order to complete that stage of life, one must come into balance with that positive and negative. So when I read this article, it was really hard for me to digest at first. But then I really enjoyed reading it. So this was a brief overview of the book that he completed on Martin Luther. And so he wrote about his life, Martin Luther's life, and really created a verbal portrait of his life. He showed that when he was younger, he had different struggles in his life. One was a personal liberation from his father, and then another, and which was also emotional, because his father was very oppressive and beat him. and then also a mental one from theology that he struggled with in his decisions to become a monk and being lonely and just not really sure that that was the right decision for him. So through the book and analysis of Luther, Erikson dealt with the vow to enter to the monastery because really it was based off of rejecting his father, um, wanting him to become a lawyer, also becoming a priest, and he panicked during his first mass. He needed assistance with that. He initially went to his father for assistance, but his father wasn't much help, and so he really had a real low at about age 23, between 23 and 25, 28. He became a doctor of theology and started having lectures. And then at age 32, really being more affirmed in his decision when you may remember the nailing of the 95 Theses on the Wittenberg church door. Erikson views Luther as suffering in his mid-20s from acute identity confusion. That identity is a really big part of Erikson's theory. He focuses on the fact that Luther had a really tricky relationship with his father. His father beat him. Luther would run away. He made Luther feel ugly. He was resentful of his father. He was very angry at his father and felt hurt. And he was afraid of his father. And even though his father did all this to him, it was hard for Luther to truly hate his father because they had this mutual investment. Erikson feels like they had a mutual investment. Now, it's interesting that the mother also beat him, but Martin didn't have the same type of resentment towards his mother. It wasn't as intense. And so, in order to rebel against his father wanted him to become a lawyer. He decided to become a monk. When Luther reached rock bottom, he ended up finding a father surrogate kind of to help him with his identity. Again, that identity piece is coming up in Erikson's work. So, a Dr. Johann Starpitz kind of stepped into that fatherly role for Luther and helped him with Erikson calls therapeutic leverage. So, through his reception of the scriptures, Luther was able to have a surrogate mother. So, Erikson suggests that the Bible became his surrogate mother. So, this Dr. Johann Starpitz became his fatherly sponsor for his identity, and then the Bible kind of became a mother for him. Erikson believes that later in life, it felt like this was really interesting. Luther realized that he had become exactly what his father wanted him to be, although making a decision to do something opposite because he was influential, he was economically secure, and he was a type of super lawyer. So that was really interesting that even though trying to get away from what his father wanted him to do, he ends up doing something very similar. The next article I wanted to read was about how Erikson tied in a Christian philosophy or Christian value, should I say, with his psychology. So psychology meets theology. He felt that part of human development tied into personal awareness. And he felt that it was also important to have social relationships that were healthy, and it would your body, mind, and also society would influence your psychosocial development. And he noticed that many, especially in the Western world, it mentioned, had abandoned God and their soul and theology. And he felt that it had a really negative effect on their personal development. The article mentions that he was not necessarily religious, but he did hold high esteem to Jesus and his teachings because he felt that Jesus' teachings helped people to have a fuller life and more positive social connections. This was something very different than most of the people in his field at the time, and also something that a lot of people felt was a negative aspect. But Erikson felt very deeply about this social ethics part, being a part of a person's development. He was very fascinated by the possibility of understanding how people who believed in Jesus and his uh, model that he left could possibly change the trajectory of the world, and influence each person's human development. He felt that Jesus was authentic and his message served two purposes. One was humanity is one universal species, and also that a person could discover inner peace and connect to something more than just a personal I, so more than just yourself. He felt that the mother-child relationship was the model for all relationships, including that divine connection. Now, even though he felt this way, he really distanced himself from organized religion, and he never pronounced himself to be a believer. So, a brief overview of everything that I learned about his stages. He was concerned with being an artist, and it really played a factor in his theory and his therapy sessions with people. It's even brought out that he would do sketches during the sessions to kind of possibly, it was thought of to maybe convey their emotions during sessions. So he was very descriptive in his writings, which was, something very unique to him, but also could make some of his writings hard to understand. He was influenced by Freud's psychoanalytic circle in Vienna. So that influenced his theory, even though he did veer from that quite a bit. He contributed a portion of his work toward understanding religion and how that would impact socialization. He really had original ideas, and he was okay with being different from those around him. He believed that human development continues throughout a person's entire life and that it was a lifelong process, not just something from childhood to adulthood. And he also enjoyed studying commonalities across different psychosocial conflicts that people had to deal with in their everyday life, such as immigrants, refugees, people who were persecuted, minorities. Vital involvement was a big part of his theory. He felt that meaningful interaction with the environment was essential. He also felt that each person had positive and negative behaviors, and meaningful engagement with people, materials, and ideas helped to make up an environment and community. And Erikson's theory considers that the person, along with their environment, has a simultaneous mutual influence on each other. So, this is a chart of the different stages created by Erikson. I didn't want to go over all of the stages, but I did want to bring attention to infancy, and then basic trust. So, trust versus mistrust, and then hope. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But then it goes all the way up into old age, maturity. So, ego integrity versus despair, also being able to gain wisdom. So these are the 8 stages. So to kind of describe each stage, I found this chart. Again, I don't want to go over every single thing, but you can kind of just look through here. And it also shows the different ages. So infancy would be up to 1 year, trust versus mistrust. And then adolescence would be teen years to 20s, young adulthood, 20 to 40s, which I found really interesting. That's a pretty big gap from 20s to 40s. But I mean, just because you're 20 or 25, it does not necessarily mean that you're not out of, your adolescent stage. Or everybody moves through, according to Erikson, everyone moves through these stages at their own pace. And again, um, you have to conquer that focal point mentioned back here. So your purpose, your will, love, care, wisdom, in order to move to the next stage. So everyone is different. I wanted to share some kind of practical examples of what the stages mean. So I just chose three. So infancy, trust versus mistrust. Parents. So they don't want their child to just blindly trust anybody who just comes up to them and wants to give them some attention, right? So they want them to develop a sense of basic trust, but then also have a mistrust of people who maybe would not have their best interests at heart. And then that newborn child and mother relationship, it helps the child to experience how much or how little I am able to trust or mistrust the world around me. So, dynamic balance of opposite. So, this happens when conditions shift. So, for example, a later life event, maybe partner dies in death. So, the loss requires the older person to move on from a lifelong sense of love. Um, and they may have acquired this intimacy versus isolation, but they might have to go back and do it again. You know, do this focal point again if they find a new partner, or if they decide to stay single. And then old age, integrity versus despair. So a good example, let's just say, for example, an 83-year-old woman is living in a senior housing community. Even though she needs help for certain problems, such as shopping and cooking, vital involvement means that she still needs to have a meaningful involvement in her daily life. Even though that she needs assistance, she still needs to be able to maybe make greeting cards, or get some kind of satisfaction from things that she likes to do, as far as Bible study classes, or she has to have some type of thing that's going to want her to conquer the day. So those taking care of elderly people, it's very important not to violate that vital involvement, or their need to have meaning and purpose, even though they may need other things in life to help with, like for assistance. So, a couple of my aha moments. One was Erikson suggests that Luther could not hate his father openly. And when he did reveal his ability to hate, it was directed toward non participants in the original father son conflict. So Luther attacked the Pope, and it was really an extension and escalation of this father son conflict. And when I read this, I really thought about being in a classroom. A lot of times the kids act out at me as a teacher. But it really helped me when I read this. It really helped me to see that, which I know, but according to Erikson, a lot of times you feel like you cannot go against your parents. And so this anger is directed at non participants. So that was really interesting. And then I also thought that how you see yourself as I, we, they is built through these childhood relationships. And It helps to either expand or narrow your possibilities. So a child gets these moral codes of we and how we're going to interact from our world through these childhood relationships. Again, I felt like that was really good application to being in the classroom. So I spoke on the earlier kind of about some of the weaknesses, but he was not theory bound. It was not really a lot of structure in his clinical thinking. And then there were in ways he was direct, but then also his writings could be very hard to follow. There's a lot of critique about his religious connections to his theory and how he supported Jesus' teachings, but not being religious necessarily himself, but more so how it had to do with interacting with society and ethics. So these are my references. I really appreciate you taking out the time to listen to my presentation today. Thank you.